The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor, but nobody noticed. All eyes were locked on my husband as he stood at the center of our living room, microphone in hand, his voice booming with confidence that made my blood run cold. 25 years is enough, he announced to our stunned guests, his smile cruel and calculated. I want someone younger. I want you out of this apartment tomorrow. The room erupted in gasps. My sister's hand flew to her mouth. His mother looked away, and there she was, his secretary, barely 30, smirking from the corner like she'd already won. Have you ever discovered that the person sleeping beside you for decades was counting down the days until they could discard you? When the man who vowed forever decides you have an expiration date, how do you survive that kind of betrayal? But here's what my husband forgot in his moment of triumph. Some foundations can't be shaken. Some women can't be broken. And some truths have a way of turning the tables when you least expect it. I reached for that microphone, and what I said next erased the smirk from both their faces. Before I tell you what happened, if you've ever felt underestimated or dismissed, hit that like button. This story is for everyone who's been told they're not enough. Drop a comment telling me, would you stay silent or speak up? And subscribe, because what unfolded that night will restore your faith in justice. 27 years ago, I believed in fairy tales. I was 28, working as an interior designer for a prestigious firm downtown, pouring my heart into creating beautiful spaces for other people's dreams. My own life felt complete. I had my career, my grandmother's apartment that she'd left me when she passed, and a circle of friends who made every weekend an adventure. I wasn't looking for love. I certainly wasn't looking for him. We met at a charity gala I'd helped organize. The venue needed last-minute decorating, and I was up on a ladder adjusting floral arrangements when I heard his voice below me. Careful up there. I'd hate for the most beautiful woman in the room to fall. I looked down, ready to roll my eyes at another tired pickup line, but something in his smile stopped me. He wasn't looking at me like prey. He was looking at me like I was already precious to him, like he'd been searching for me his entire life. I'm perfectly capable of not falling, I said, climbing down with my toolkit. I can see that, he replied, extending his hand. But maybe you'd fall for dinner instead? Tomorrow night? His name rolled off his tongue like music. He worked in marketing, he told me, building his career from the ground up. He was 32, ambitious, charming, and when he listened to me talk about my design projects, his eyes lit up like I was describing masterpieces. That first dinner stretched into 4 hours. We talked about everything: childhood dreams, favorite books, the cities we wanted to visit, the kind of life we imagined building. He told me about growing up with little, watching his parents struggle, vowing to create something better for his own family someday. Family means everything to me, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. When I commit to something, I commit completely. Forever isn't long enough for the right person. I felt my heart open in ways I didn't know were possible. Our courtship was a whirlwind of romance that swept me into a dream I never wanted to wake from. He showed up at my office with fresh flowers, every Fridonat roses, but peonies, because he'd remembered they were my favorite after I'd mentioned it once in passing. He'd leave little notes tucked into my design portfolios. The world is more beautiful because you're in it. On weekends, we'd explore the city together. He'd hold my hand as we wandered through art galleries, and he'd actually stop to read every placard, asking me what I thought about each piece. When I talked, he listened like my words were poetry he wanted to memorize. 3 months in, he cooked dinner for me in his tiny studio apartment. The meal was slightly burned, the wine was cheap, but he'd set out candles everywhere and played jazz softly in the background. I know this isn't much, he said, looking almost embarrassed. But someday, I'm going to give you everything. The life you deserve. The home you've always dreamed of. This is perfect, I whispered, and I meant it. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed exactly what he was giving me: his time, his attention, his heart laid bare. 6 months later, he proposed on the rooftop of my grandmother's apartment building. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and when he dropped to one knee, tears were streaming down his face. "You make me want to be the man I've always hoped I could become," he said, his voice breaking. "Will you build a life with me? Will you let me spend every day proving that I'm worthy of your love?" How could I say anything but yes? We married in a small ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, feeling her blessing wrap around me like a warm embrace. He cried when I walked down the aisle, and his vows were so beautiful that half the guests were sobbing by the end. "You are my home," he promised, sliding the ring onto my finger. "Wherever you are, that's where I belong. I will honor you, cherish you, and choose you every single day for the rest of my life." I believed every word. We moved into my grandmother's apartment, the one she'd left me in her will, the 3-bedroom space with original hardwood floors and windows overlooking the park. It had been in our family for 40 years, purchased when the neighborhood was still affordable, now worth a fortune in the city's booming market. "This place has good bones," he said on our first night there as newlyweds, pulling me close in the empty living room. "Just like us. We're going to fill it with so much love and laughter. Our kids will run through these hallways. We'll grow old here together, watching the seasons change through these windows." I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, imagining that future so vividly I could almost touch it. We painted walls together on weekends, laughing when we got more paint on ourselves than the surfaces. He'd surprise me by tackling household projects, fixing the leaky faucet, installing new shelving, hanging the artwork I loved. He made that apartment feel like ours, even though legally it remained solely in my name from the inheritance. It didn't matter. What was mine was his. We were partners. I supported his career ambitions wholeheartedly. When he wanted to switch companies for better opportunities, I encouraged him, even when it meant tighter finances temporarily. When he needed to work late or travel for conferences, I packed his bags and sent him off with home-cooked meals and encouraging notes tucked into his luggage. "You're the reason I can do any of this," he'd tell me, kissing my forehead before rushing out the door. "Behind every successful man is a woman who believed in him first. That's you, baby. You're my foundation." My own career took a back seat, gradually, and then completely. When his job demanded more, I cut back my hours. When we talked about starting a family, I went part-time, then quit altogether to focus on creating the perfect home for children who never came. The fertility struggles nearly broke us, or so I thought at the time, but he held me through every negative test, every failed procedure, every crushing disappointment. "We have each other," he'd whisper during those dark nights. "That's more than enough. You are more than enough." Looking back now, I can see the hairline cracks that were forming even then. The way he started mentioning my age during arguments. "You're not a kid anymore, you should know better." The comments about my appearance that felt like concern but carried sharp edges. "Maybe you should get back to the gym, you've been stressed eating lately." But I explained those moments away. Marriage is work, I told myself. Everyone has rough patches. He's under pressure at work. He doesn't mean it the way it sounds. I painted over those cracks with optimism and denial, choosing to see the man I'd fallen in love with, rather than the one who was slowly emerging from behind the mask. If only I'd known then what I know now. Some foundations can't support the weight of lies forever. Eventually, Everything built on deception comes crashing down. The question is whether you're standing in the rubble or watching safely from solid ground when it happens. The changes didn't happen overnight. That's the insidious thing about emotional abuse. It creeps in so slowly that you don't notice you're drowning until water fills your lungs. Year 7 was when I first felt the shift, though I couldn't name it then. His promotions kept coming, each one celebrated with expensive dinners and congratulations from colleagues who looked at him with admiration. He was climbing the corporate ladder with impressive speed, and I was genuinely proud. I'd cheer him on from the sidelines, hosting dinner parties for his business associates, making sure our home was always presentable, always welcoming. "You're so lucky," his coworkers' wives would tell me. "He's going places. You married a man with a future." What they didn't see were the small cutting remarks that started infiltrating our conversations at home. "You don't understand business," he'd say when I offered opinions about his work challenges. "It's complicated. You wouldn't get it. This house is a mess," he'd announce, even when I'd spent all day cleaning. "What exactly do you do all day?" When I mentioned possibly returning to interior design work, maybe taking on a few small clients, his response was dismissive. "We don't need the money. Besides, you've been out of the game too long. The industry has moved on. You'd be starting from zero, and honestly, at your age, who's going to take you seriously?" At your age. I was 35, but I internalized his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had let my skills atrophy. Maybe I was being unrealistic about jumping back into a competitive field after years away. So I stayed home, perfecting my role as the supportive wife, convincing myself that my worth lay in making his life easier. By year 10, the criticism had become constant background noise. Nothing I did was quite right. Dinner was too salty or too bland. I was too clingy or too distant. I dressed too casually or tried too hard. My laugh was too loud at parties. I embarrassed him by talking too much or made him look bad by being too quiet. "I'm just trying to help you improve," he'd say when I got tears in my eyes. "If I don't tell you, who will? Everyone else is too polite. I'm doing this because I love you." I started second-guessing everything. Before speaking, I'd rehearse sentences in my head, analyzing how they might be received, whether they'd trigger his irritation. I dressed in the mornings with his potential reactions in mind. I walked on eggshells in my own home, the home my grandmother had left me, the home that should have been my sanctuary. My friends started noticing. My best friend since college pulled me aside after a gathering where he'd corrected me 3 times in front of everyone. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "He seems different lately, harsher with you." "He's just stressed with work," I replied automatically. "He doesn't mean anything by it. You know how he gets when he's under pressure." "Does he get that way with his colleagues?" she pressed. "Or just with you?" I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I did, but I wasn't ready to face it. The distance between us grew into a chasm I couldn't bridge no matter how hard I tried. He started working later, coming home after I'd already eaten dinner alone. Business trips became more frequent, sometimes with only a day's notice. Weekend golf outings with clients. Evening networking events I wasn't invited to. "You wouldn't enjoy it," he'd say. "It's all shop talk. You'd be bored." I tried rekindling the romance we'd once had. I'd plan date nights reservations at the restaurant where we had our first dinner, tickets to shows he'd mentioned wanting to see. Sometimes he'd cancel last minute. Other times he'd come but spend the entire evening checking his phone, barely engaging in conversation. "Can you put that away?" I asked one night, my voice small. "Just for an hour? I miss talking to you." He looked at me like I was being unreasonable. The world doesn't stop because you're feeling needy. Some of us have responsibilities. I stopped planning date nights. Year 15 marked a turning point in his career, a major promotion that came with a significant salary increase. You'd think it would ease the tension, but it only made things worse. His success seemed to highlight everything he perceived as my failures. "I'm VP now," he announced, loosening his tie after the celebration dinner. "I need a wife who fits that image, someone polished, someone who makes an impression." "What do you think I've been doing?" I asked, hurt bleeding through every word. "I've supported every step of your career. I've hosted every dinner, attended every function, smiled through every..." "Supported?" He laughed, the sound cruel. "You've been a passenger. There's a difference between supporting and just existing in the background." His mother started making pointed comments during family gatherings. "You know, dear, there are excellent personal trainers at my gym. I could get you a referral. Or, have you thought about updating your wardrobe?" First impressions matter so much in his position now. I realized later that he'd been feeding her these concerns, painting me as the frumpy, aging wife who couldn't keep up with his ascending lifestyle. I tried harder. I joined that gym. I bought new clothes with money from my dwindling savings account, the account I'd had since before our marriage, funded by my old design work. I got my hair colored to hide the gray that was apparently so offensive. I smiled more, talked less, made myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into whatever box he seemed to need me in. It was never enough. By year 20, we were essentially roommates who shared a last name. He had his bedroom he'd moved into the guest room 2 years earlier, claiming his snoring kept me awake, though I'd never complained. I had mine. We had separate schedules, separate lives, connected only by shared address and marriage certificate. The apartment that once rang with laughter and music now echoed with silence. I'd walk through rooms filled with furniture we'd chosen together, photographs of a couple who no longer existed, memories that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I found receipts that didn't make sense. Charges at hotels in our own city. Expensive jewelry purchases I never received. Romantic restaurant bills from nights he claimed he was working late at the office. Part of me knew. Part of me had known for a while. But acknowledging it meant facing the collapse of everything I'd built my identity around for over 2 decades. So I tucked those receipts back where I'd found them and pretended not to see. My sister confronted me one afternoon over coffee. "You're disappearing," she said bluntly. "The woman you used to be vibrant, confident, creative, where did she go? This isn't what love looks like. You don't understand," I whispered. "Marriage is complicated. It's not always romance and passion. Sometimes it's just enduring, commitment. There's a difference between commitment and imprisonment," she shot back. "You're living in a jail cell you've decorated beautifully and calling it a home." Her words haunted me, but still, I stayed. Where would I go? What would I do? I was 48 years old, no recent work experience, no independent income. He controlled the finances, the accounts, the investments, the credit cards. Everything ran through him now, even though I contributed nothing and therefore, in his view, deserved access to nothing beyond basic household expenses. I'd given up everything: career, independence, sense of self, and now felt trapped by those very sacrifices. The irony wasn't lost on me. I lived in an apartment that was legally mine, that I owned outright, yet somehow I felt like I had nothing. He'd managed to make me feel like a guest in my own inheritance, dependent on his generosity to survive. Year 23 brought a new secretary to his office. I met her at the company holiday party, young, ambitious, bright-eyed, everything I used to be before life wore me down. He introduced her with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in his voice in years. "She's a real go-getter," he said, his hand lingering on her shoulder just a second too long. Reminds me of myself at that age, hungry for success. She smiled at me with something that looked like pity. Or maybe it was triumph. I couldn't tell anymore. I watched them throughout that party, the way he laughed at her jokes, leaned in when she spoke, touched her elbow, her back, found excuses to be near her. And I watched her respond, saw the dance I'd once been part of now playing out with a newer model. That night, lying alone in my bedroom, I finally admitted the truth. My marriage was over. It had been over for years. I'd just been too afraid to say it out loud. But knowing something and doing something about it are two entirely different battles. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment. How do you know when it's time to stop fighting for something that's already dead? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The invitation idea came from his mother. 25 years is a milestone, she said during one of our increasingly awkward family dinners. You should celebrate properly, a party, something elegant that befits his position in the company. He looked at me across the table, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or calculation. What do you think? He asked, the first time he'd solicited my opinion on anything in months. Hope bloomed in my chest, foolish and stubborn as a weed pushing through concrete. Maybe this was it. Maybe this anniversary would be the turning point. Maybe planning something together would remind us of who we used to be. I think it's a wonderful idea, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. We could host it at the apartment. I could handle all the arrangements. The apartment, he repeated, something unreadable crossing his face. Yes, that would be appropriate. I threw myself into the planning with an energy I hadn't felt in years. This would be my masterpiece, my last-ditch effort to salvage what remained of us. If I could create something beautiful enough, meaningful enough, maybe he'd remember why he'd loved me in the first place. I spent weeks meticulously crafting every detail. The guest list grew to 70 people, his colleagues and their spouses, his family, the few friends of mine who'd stuck around through the years of my gradual isolation, neighbors who'd watched us grow older in the building. The theme would be silver and white, elegant and timeless. I ordered custom invitations on thick cream cardstock with embossed silver lettering. 25 years of love and partnership, they read. Each one felt like a prayer I was sending out into the universe. He barely engaged with the planning. When I'd ask his opinion about the menu, the music, the seating arrangements, he'd wave me off. You handle it, he'd say without looking up from his phone. That's what you're good at, making things look pretty. The dismissiveness stung, but I pushed forward. This party would be perfect, even if I had to create perfection alone. I hired caterers who specialized in elegant finger foods and sophisticated presentations. The menu included all his favorite prosciutto-wrapped figs, truffle risotto bites, seared scallops, chocolate mousse in delicate glasses. I ordered his preferred whiskey, the expensive bottle he saved for special occasions, and champagne for toasts. The florist and I spent an afternoon discussing arrangements. White roses and silver eucalyptus, accents of crystal and candlelight. The apartment would look like something from a magazine spread my interior design skills finally put to use after years of dormancy. You have such a beautiful eye, the florist said, making notes on her tablet. Your husband is lucky to have someone who cares so much about creating meaningful celebrations. If only she knew how little meaning any of it seemed to hold for him. 2 weeks before the party, I went shopping for a dress. I wanted something special, something that would make him look at me the way he used to. I tried on dozens, finally settling on a navy silk gown that hugged my figure in all the right places, elegant, age-appropriate, but still showing that I was a woman worth noticing. The saleswoman zipped me up and spun me toward the mirror. "Stunning," she breathed. "Whoever you're wearing this for is a very fortunate person." I stared at my reflection. The dress was beautiful, yes, but the woman wearing it looked tired around the eyes. Hopeful, but haunted. Fighting, but already defeated. I bought the dress anyway. Hope dies hard, even when it should. At home, I showed it to him, doing a little turn in our bedroom doorway. "What do you think? For the party?" He glanced up from his laptop for maybe 3 seconds. "Fine. Whatever makes you happy. Not, you look beautiful. Not, I can't wait to see you in it. Just fine." The week of the party, his behavior grew strange. He took phone calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I walked by. He'd disappear for hours with vague explanations about last-minute work emergencies. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling at his phone screen, an expression of satisfaction I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Is everything okay?" I asked one evening as he poured himself a drink, his third of the night. "Everything's perfect," he said, and something in his tone made my skin crawl. Everything's finally falling into place. I told myself he was talking about work, about some deal closing or promotion coming through. I couldn't allow myself to imagine what else might be falling into place. The day before the party, I transformed the apartment into the vision I'd been carrying in my head for weeks. The furniture was rearranged to create better flow for mingling. Every surface gleamed. The flowers were delivered and arranged throughout the space: living room, dining area, even the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Candles everywhere, their holders polished until they reflected light like tiny mirrors. I stood in the center of it all that evening, surveying my work. The apartment looked magical, ready to host a celebration worthy of 25 years of marriage. My grandmother would have been proud of what I'd done with her home. But as I looked around, a strange thought occurred to me. I was standing in a space that was legally entirely mine. The deed had my name alone. The inheritance had been mine before he entered my life. And yet, somehow, over 25 years, he'd made me feel like a guest in these rooms, like I was borrowing space in my own home, living there at his pleasure. How had that happened? That night, he came home late, reeking of expensive perfume that wasn't mine. "Big day tomorrow," he said, brushing past me without meeting my eyes. Better get some sleep. He disappeared into his bedroom, the guest room that had become his permanent residence, and closed the door with a definitive click. I lay awake in my own room, staring at the ceiling, anxiety gnawing at my stomach like something alive and hungry. Something felt wrong. The air crackled with the kind of tension that comes before storms, before earthquakes, before worlds shift on their axis. The morning of the anniversary, I woke early despite barely sleeping. I went through my routines: mechanically shower, hair, makeup applied with extra care to hide the shadows under my eyes. The navy dress fit perfectly, and with my grandmother's pearl necklace at my throat, I almost looked like a woman who had her life together. The caterers arrived at noon, taking over the kitchen with professional efficiency. The bartender set up his station. Last-minute details were attended to with precision. Everything was unfolding according to plan. He emerged from his room at 3 o'clock, impeccably dressed in a suit I didn't recognize. New, expensive, tailored perfectly to his frame. "You look nice," I offered, the words feeling formal and strange in my mouth. "Thanks," he replied, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. adjusting his tie with particular care. "So do you." The compliment should have warmed me. Instead, it felt ominous. He'd barely looked at me in months, and suddenly he was noticing my appearance on the day we were supposed to celebrate our marriage? Guests began arriving at 6. The apartment filled with voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, and compliments on the Dacre. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, moving through the carefully orchestrated space I'd created. I played my role perfectly, the gracious hostess, smiling and thanking people for coming, accepting congratulations on reaching this milestone. 25 years. A quarter century. Long enough to build a life. Long enough to watch it crumble. He worked the rooms separately, holding court with colleagues, laughing too loudly at jokes, drinking steadily throughout the evening. I noticed his secretary had arrived, the young woman with a bright smile and hungry eyes. She positioned herself near him, always within his orbit, and he seemed to gravitate toward her like a moth to flame. My sister caught my arm as I passed through the crowd. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just want everything to go well." "Something feels off," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "He's acting strange, almost giddy." Before I could respond, I heard the sharp tap of metal on glass. The room quieted gradually as people turned toward the sound. He stood in the center of the living room, microphone in hand when... Had he gotten a microphone? His face flushed with alcohol and something else. Something that looked disturbingly like triumph. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" His voice boomed through the apartment, my apartment, drowning out the soft jazz that had been playing in the background. The crowd gathered closer, expecting a sweet anniversary toast, a declaration of love, a tribute to 25 years of partnership. I stood frozen near the kitchen, my champagne glass sweating in my grip, every instinct screaming that something terrible was about to happen. His eyes found mine across the room, and he smiled. It was the cruelest smile I'd ever seen, and it was aimed directly at me. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the space. Time seemed to slow. The candlelight flickered. Somewhere in the background, someone laughed, unaware that the temperature in the room was about to drop to freezing. And then he spoke the words that would detonate my life in front of 70 witnesses. 25 years is enough. The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every corner of the room, contaminating everything they touched. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what I was hearing. "I've given this marriage a quarter of a century," he continued, his voice steady and rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "I've sacrificed my best years. I've stayed committed when I could have had other options. But a man reaches a point where he has to ask himself, is this really how I want to spend the rest of my life?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sister moved toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping her. I needed to hear this. I needed to witness the full extent of his cruelty. "I deserve happiness," he said, and the audacity of those words nearly knocked me off my feet. I deserve passion. I deserve someone who appreciates what I've become, what I've achieved, someone who matches my ambition and energy. Someone young, he meant. Someone who hadn't sacrificed her youth and dreams to build the platform he now stood on. His eyes swept the room, landing on his secretary. She stood near the window, dressed in red bold, confident, predatory. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. She didn't even have the decency to appear uncomfortable. "Life is too short to settle," he continued, and I watched his mother shift uncomfortably, unable to meet my eyes. She'd known. Of course she'd known. The gym recommendations, the wardrobe suggestions she'd been preparing me for replacement, softening the ground for this moment. "So I've made a decision," he announced, his voice growing stronger, more certain. "Tonight marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I want someone younger, someone who excites me, someone who makes me feel alive again." My legs trembled. The room tilted. Someone's hand, maybe my sister's. Maybe a friend's, touched my shoulder, but I barely felt it. Everything had narrowed to the man standing in the center of my living room, destroying 25 years of my life like it was nothing more than an inconvenient contract he'd grown tired of honoring. But he wasn't finished. "And since we're making announcements tonight," he said, turning to face me directly, his smile sharp as broken glass, "I need you to pack your things. I want you out of this apartment by tomorrow." The room exploded. Voices erupted from every direction, shocked exclamations, angry protests, my sister shouting something I couldn't make out over the roaring in my ears. His secretary's smile widened. His mother covered her face with her hands. Some of his colleagues looked uncomfortable, others intrigued by the drama unfolding before them like a television show they couldn't turn away from. Tomorrow. He wanted me gone by tomorrow. From my own apartment. The home my grandmother had left me. The space that had been in my family for 4 decades, that I'd inherited years before I ever met him, that had always been mine, and mine alone. He thought he could evict me from my own inheritance. The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, exploding against the marble floor in a spray of crystal shards and golden liquid. The sound cut through the chaos, creating a moment of sudden silence. And in that silence, I saw everything clearly. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in the heat of the moment. This was calculated, planned, rehearsed. He'd orchestrated this entire evening specifically to humiliate me in the most public way possible. The anniversary party wasn't a celebrationette, was a stage for my execution. He'd invited everyone who mattered in our combined social circles to witness my destruction. He'd waited until the apartment was full, until there were 70 witnesses, to announce that he was trading me in for a newer model. He wanted me humiliated, broken, grateful for whatever scraps he decided to throw me as he kicked me out of what he'd convinced himself was his home. He'd planned this like a business presentation, right down to the microphone he'd somehow acquired without my knowledge. I looked around the room, seeing the scene through new eyes. His colleagues, mostly men, mostly successful, mostly on their second or third wives, watched, with a mixture of discomfort and recognition. They'd done this before, or would do it eventually. Trading in aging spouses for younger versions was practically a status symbol in his world. Their wives looked at me with pity and fear. Today, it was me. Tomorrow, it could be any of them. My own friends, the few who'd remained despite years of my canceling plans and making excuses for his behavior, stared in horror. They'd tried to warn me. They'd seen this coming. And I'd defended him at every turn. His family members averted their eyes. Complicit. Silent. Choosing him over basic human decency because blood is thicker than morality. And there, by the window in her red dress, like a victory flag, stood his secretary. She wasn't even trying to hide her satisfaction. She'd won. Or so she thought. She'd landed the Priza successful executive with money and status, and all she'd had to do was wait for him to discard the old model. She was young enough to believe she was special, that she was different, that he'd chosen her for her unique qualities, rather than simply her age and her willingness to worship him. She didn't realize she was looking at her own future, standing right in front of her in a navy dress and pearls. He mistook my silence for defeat. I could see it in his face, the satisfaction, the sense of total victory. He'd won. He'd delivered his blow, and I was too shocked to fight back. "I think we're done here," he said, his voice gentler now, almost magnanimous in his cruelty. "Everyone can finish their drinks, but the celebration is over. My soon-to-be ex-wife needs time to process and pack." Soon-to-be ex-wife. He'd already written the ending in his mind, already moved on to his next chapter, already erased me from the narrative except as a footnote, the first wife, the one who'd served her purpose and was now inconvenient. My sister pushed through the crowd toward me. "Don't you dare let him do this," she hissed. "Fight back. Say something." But I couldn't speak. Not yet, because something was happening inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. The fog that had clouded my mind for so long was lifting. The fear that had kept me small and silent was burning away like morning mist under a harsh sun. And in its place, something cold and clear and powerful was taking root. I looked at him really, looked at him and suddenly saw him for exactly what he was. Not the man I'd fallen in love with 27 years ago. Not the husband who'd promised forever. Not even the cruel stranger who'd gradually revealed himself over the past decade. No. I saw a mediocre man who'd built his success on my sacrifices, who'd lived in luxury in my apartment, who'd enjoyed the fruits of my grandmother's legacy while convincing himself he was the one providing everything. I saw a fool who'd forgotten that some foundations can't be claimed just by standing on them long enough. I saw a man who'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman he'd spent 25 years trying to diminish. My hands stopped shaking. My breath steadied. The room came back into sharp focus, every face, every detail, every witness to what he thought was my humiliation. He was still talking, saying something about having his lawyer contact me, about keeping this civil, about hoping we could part as adults. I started walking toward him. The crowd parted like water, creating a path between us. His words faltered. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. "What are you?" he began. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was so surprised he let it go without resistance. The weight of it felt good in my palm. Solid. Real. Powerful. I turned to face the room 70 witnesses who'd come expecting to celebrate an anniversary, and instead got a demolition. They'd seen him tear me down. Now they were going to watch what happened when you push a woman too far, when you mistake silence for weakness, when you forget that the ground you're standing on belongs to someone else. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. "I'm so glad you could be here for this moment." The room held its collective breath. He reached for the microphone, his face flushing darker. "That's enough. Give that back." I stepped away from him, keeping the microphone close. "No, I don't think I will." "You've had your say. Now it's my turn." "There's nothing you need to say," he insisted, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be." "Uglier?" I repeated, and a laugh escaped me, bitter, broken, but somehow liberating. "You just announced you're leaving me for a younger woman at our anniversary party, in front of everyone we know, and demanded I vacate my home by tomorrow. I'm not sure how much uglier it can get." My sister started clapping. Slowly at first, then louder. One of my old college friends joined her, then another. The sounds spread like wildfire until half the room was applauding not for him, but for me, for finally speaking up. He looked around, confused by the shifting energy, by the loss of control over his carefully orchestrated humiliation. 27 years ago, I began, my voice carrying to every corner of the apartment, I met a man at a charity gala. He was charming, ambitious, and he said all the right things. He told me family meant everything. He told me forever wasn't long enough. He promised me the world. I saw her, his secretary, shift uncomfortably by the window. Reality was beginning to dawn on her face. Those same words he'd said to me, he'd probably said to her. The same promises, the same script. I believed him, I continued. When he proposed, when he cried at our wedding, when he vowed to honor and cherish me, I believed every single word. I believed in us so completely that I gave up everything to support his dreams. This is unnecessary, he tried to interrupt. I quit my career. I spoke over him. I gave up my design work, my clients, my professional identity. I stayed home to build the perfect life for us. When children didn't come, when the fertility treatments failed, I blamed myself. I thought I was failing him, failing us. The room was silent now except for my voice. Even the caterers had stopped moving, frozen in place by the raw emotion pouring out of me. I made myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into whatever version of a wife he seemed to need. When he criticized me, I thanked him for caring enough to help me improve. When he moved into a separate bedroom, I told myself it was practical. When he stopped looking at me like I mattered, I convinced myself that's just what happens after years of marriage. My sister was crying openly now. So were several other people. But I kept going because if I stopped, I might never find this courage again. I lived in fear. I said, the truth of it cracking my voice, fear that I wasn't enough. Fear that I was too old, too boring, too much of a disappointment. I let him convince me that I was lucky he stayed, that no one else would want me, that I should be grateful for the scraps of attention he occasionally threw my way. That's not fair, he protested weakly. I never said you said it every day, I cut him off. In 1,000 small ways. Every dismissive comment. Every eye roll. Every time you made me feel like my thoughts, my feelings, my existence was an inconvenience to your important life. I could feel something shifting inside me with every word, years of suppressed anger, swallowed hurt, denied reality all rising to the surface like a tidal wave that had been building for decades. But here's what's funny, I said, and despite everything, I found myself almost smiling. In all your careful planning of tonight's grand announcement, in all your rehearsing of your speech about wanting someone younger, in all your orchestrating of my public humiliation, you forgot something crucial. His face went pale. I watched the realization start to dawn. You forgot to check whose name is on the deed to this apartment. The air left the room. His mother gasped. His secretary's smile vanished. His colleagues exchanged glances. My sister let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. This apartment, I continued, my voice growing stronger with every syllable, was left to me by my grandmother 30 years ago. Long before I met you. The deed has only my name. It has always had only my name. We've been married 25 years, he sputtered. That makes it marital property. Actually, it doesn't, I said calmly. I checked with a lawyer. 3 months ago, when I first found the receipts from hotels in our own city. When I discovered the jewelry charges for pieces I never received. When I stopped being able to ignore what was happening. His face went from pale to gray. Inheritances received before marriage, kept in the original heir's name alone, remain separate property. This apartment is mine. It has always been mine. It will always be mine. I let that truth settle over the room like snow, covering everything in cold clarity. So, when you say you want me out by tomorrow, I continued, what you actually mean is that you need to pack your things and find somewhere else to live, because you, my dear husband, are the one who's leaving. The room erupted again, but this time the energy was different. There was cheering, applause, shouts of support. His colleagues looked at him with something between pity and contempt. His secretary backed away from him slightly, as if his failure was contagious. He stood there, microphone-less, powerless, watching his moment of triumph transform into his moment of exposure. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. My grandmother's presence, her strength flowing through me like a legacy finally claimed. This apartment wasn't just property. It was her gift to me, her way of making sure I always had a foundation that no one could take away. She'd known. Somehow, she'd seen what I couldn't see when I was young and in love, and convinced that romance could conquer anything. She'd made sure I'd always have solid ground beneath my feet. And now, standing in the middle of her home, my home, I finally understood the gift she'd given me. It wasn't just walls and floors and windows overlooking the park. It was the possibility of starting over. It was the reminder that I was someone before he came along. And I would still be someone after he left. It was freedom, preserved in a deed with only my name, waiting for the day I'd be ready to claim it. That day was today. I took a breath and turned to face the entire room, making eye contact with as many people as I could. These witnesses had come expecting one show. They were going to leave having seen something entirely different. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," I said, my voice clear and calm now, the trembling completely gone. "Your presence means more than you know, because you're here to witness not an ending, but a beginning. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, tried one more time to take control. This is between us. We don't need to air our private business." "Oh, but you already did that," I reminded him gently. "You made this public. You chose to humiliate me in front of 70 people. So now they get to hear the rest of the story. Fair is fair." He had no response to that. "I want to address something my husband said earlier," I continued. "He said he deserves happiness. He deserves passion. He deserves someone who appreciates what he's become. And you know what? He's absolutely right." Confusion crossed his face. This wasn't the script he'd expected. "Everyone deserves those things," I said, "including me. Especially me, actually, since I'm the one who helped him become what he is today." I turned to his colleagues, the executives and managers who'd benefited from the dinner parties I'd hosted, the connections I'd facilitated, the impression of stability and success that a devoted wife provides. How many of you have been to this apartment for dinner parties over the years? How many deals were softened by good food and comfortable atmosphere? How many promotions were helped along by the image of a successful family man with a gracious wife? Several of them had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm not looking for thanks," I said. "I'm just establishing the record. Because my husband has a tendency to rewrite history, to forget contributions that don't serve his narrative." I looked at his secretary, still lurking by the window in her red dress, her confidence evaporating by the second. "He probably told you he built his success alone," I said to her directly, "that he's a self-made man, that his wife was just there, taking up space, getting older and less interesting while he achieved greatness." She didn't respond, but I saw the truth in her eyes. He had said exactly that. "Here's what he didn't tell you," I continued. "When we married, he was a mid-level associate with ambition but no polish. This apartment, my apartment, became the place where he could host clients and bosses, where he could present himself as established and sophisticated. The address alone opened doors for him. Do you know what apartments in this building are worth now? What it signals to have this location?" I let that sink in. He didn't tell you that I supported him financially during 2 career transitions, using my savings from my design work. He didn't tell you that I ghost-wrote half his presentations in the early years, that I coached him on how to dress, how to network, how to navigate corporate politics. His face was crimson now, rage and embarrassment fighting for dominance. He didn't tell you that 3 months ago, I finally hired a lawyer, that I've been documenting everything, that I know about the company credit card he's been using for your romantic dinners. That's embezzlement, by the way. Using corporate funds for personal affairs. I wonder how his boss would feel about that. His eyes widened. He hadn't known I knew that detail. He didn't tell you that we have a prenup, I said, watching him flinch. One he signed without reading carefully because he was so confident in his own future success. One that protects my premarital assets absolutely and limits his claim to marital assets accumulated during the prod. Marriage. Matt's private, he hissed. So was our marriage, until you decided to end it publicly, I shot back. I turned to address the whole room again. Here's what's going to happen. My husband is going to pack his belongings and vacate this apartment by the end of the week. I'm being generous with the buy timeline. He's going to remove his name from all utilities and accounts associated with this address. He's going to forward his mail to whatever new address he establishes. You can't just, he started. I absolutely can, I interrupted. This is my home. You are living here because I allowed it. That permission is now revoked. I looked at his mother, who still couldn't meet my eyes. You'll want to help him pack, I told her. Since you clearly knew this was coming and said nothing to warn me. I hope that worked out the way you hoped. She flinched but remained silent. As for the division of assets, I continued, my lawyer will be in touch, but I'll give you the overview now. You get half of what we accumulated together during the marriage. That's the law, and despite everything, I believe in fairness, but you get nothing, not one single thing that was mine before we married. Not this apartment, not my grandmother's furniture, not the artwork on these walls that came from my family. Nothing. I gave you 25 years, he said, his voice desperate now. That has to count for something. It does count, I agreed. It counts as 25 years of my life I spent building you up while you were systematically tearing me down. It counts as 2.5 decades of sacrificing my dreams for yours. It counts as the years I can never get back. The career I can't reclaim. The version of myself I had to bury to be what you needed. My voice broke slightly, but I pushed through. But here's what you're going to learn, I said. I'm 53 years old. Yes, I'm older than your girlfriend. I have gray hair and wrinkles and a body that shows the evidence of living. But I'm not done. I'm not finished. I'm not used up and discarded. I stood taller, feeling the power of my grandmother's legacy literally holding me up through the floorboards beneath my feet. I'm going to reclaim my life. I'm going to revive my career. I'm going to fill this apartment with people who actually love me, who value me, who see me as something more than an accessory to be upgraded when a newer model comes along. The applause started again, louder this time. My sister was sobbing. Several of my old friends were cheering. Even some of his colleagues were nodding with what looked like respect. You wanted someone younger? I said, looking directly at him. Go ahead. Build your life with someone who doesn't know yet that you're the kind of man who throws away 25 years like it's trash. Build it on rented ground in someone else's space because you have no foundation of your own. I held out the microphone to him. But you're going to do it somewhere else. Because this home, this life, this future, it's mine. It was always mine. You just forgot that for a while. He didn't take the microphone. He just stood there, diminished and exposed, the architect of his own downfall. Everyone should finish their drinks, I announced to the room. The celebration is over. But not for the reason he thought. We're celebrating the end of a lie and the beginning of truth. We're celebrating the fact that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. We're celebrating that some foundations can be shaken, no matter how hard someone tries. I set the microphone down on the table. Thank you all for coming. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a life to reclaim. The apartment emptied slowly after my declaration. Guests filtered out in clusters, some stopping to hug me, others squeezing my hand without words, a few whispering encouragement that I'd treasure later when the adrenaline wore off and reality set in. My sister stayed, of course. She'd always stayed, even when I'd pushed her away during the worst years. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, holding me tight as the last guests trickled out. "I've been waiting for this version of you to come back." He tried to approach me once the room cleared, his secretary conspicuously absent. She'd slipped out during the chaos, probably reassessing her prize now that she understood he came with nothing but debt and delusion. "We need to talk," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "Privately." "No," I said simply. "Anything you need to say can go through my lawyer. Her card is on the kitchen counter. Take it when you leave." "When I leave?" He looked around the apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. "Tonight? You're throwing me out tonight? You wanted me out by tomorrow," I reminded him. "I'm giving you until the end of the week. That's 5 more days than you gave me. Consider it my final gift to you." His mother tried to intercede, placing her hand on my arm with false warmth. "Surely we can discuss this like adults. There's no need for such hostility." I removed her hand gently but firmly. "Your son just announced he was leaving me for another woman at our anniversary party and demanded I vacate my own home. If you think my response is hostile, your sense of proportion needs serious adjustment." She stepped back, offended, but I was done caring about offending people who'd never cared about protecting me. He gathered his things: wallet, phone, keys that would no longer open his door, moving with the mechanical motions of someone in shock. At the door, he turned back one last time. "You'll regret this," he said. "You're going to be alone. No one's going to want a woman your age. You'll come crawling back." I smiled, and it was genuine. If I'm alone, I'll be alone in my own space, on my own terms, answering to no one. That sounds like heaven compared to the loneliness I felt being married to you. The door closed behind him with a satisfying click. And then I broke down. My sister held me on the couch while I sobbed, not for him, not for the marriage, but for the years lost, for the woman I'd allowed myself to become, for the dreams I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten they existed. "Let it out," she murmured. "You've been holding this in for too long." I cried until I was empty, until the tears stopped coming, until exhaustion replaced emotion. "What do I do now?" I whispered. "Now..." She pulled back to look at me. "Now you live." The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from him and twice as many from his mother. I blocked both numbers and made coffee in the blessed silence of my home, truly my home now, not a space I shared with someone who made me feel small. My lawyer called at 9. "I heard about last night," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That took guts. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "What happens next?" "He's going to try to fight. They always do. But everything you told me 3 months ago, everything we documented, it's going to work in your favor. The prenup is airtight. The apartment is completely protected. His affair is documented. We're in a strong position." "How long will it take?" "Months, probably, maybe a year. But you're going to be fine. Better than fine." Over the next few days, he came by with his brother to collect his belongings. I wasn't there. I stayed with my sister while they packed, unable to watch him dismantle the physical evidence of our shared life. When I returned, the apartment felt emptier but somehow lighter. His closet was bare. His desk was cleared. His books were gone from the shelves. Half the furniture had disappeared, things we'd bought together that he was entitled to take. But the bones of the space remained. My grandmother's pieces. the artwork from my family, the rugs we'd inherited. The foundation stayed intact while the superficial additions vanished. It felt appropriate. Friends started calling the ones I'd neglected during the years of my marriage, the ones who'd tried to stay connected despite my gradual withdrawal. They'd heard about the party. Word had spread fast. "Coffee this week?" they'd ask. "Lunch? We've missed you." I said yes to all of them. Yes to reconnection. Yes to rebuilding bridges I'd let crumble. Yes to being seen again by people who remembered who I was before I became invisible. My college friend took me to lunch at a cafe I'd never been to. "You look different," she said, studying my face. "Lighter somehow." I feel like I've been holding my breath for 10 years and finally remembered how to exhale, I admitted. "What are you going to do? Career-wise, I mean." The question sparked something in my chest, excitement mixed with terror. "I don't know. Interior design feels like another lifetime. Would anyone even hire me now? Are you kidding?" She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "Look at my house. Look at this disaster. I've been meaning to hire someone for years. If you're interested in getting back into it, even small projects, I know at least 5 people who'd jump at the chance." Small projects. I could do small projects. I could rebuild slowly, carefully, one room at a time, both in my career and in my life. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 clients. Within a month, I had 7. Word spread that I was available, that I had an eye for transforming spaces, that I understood how to make a house feel like a home without overwhelming it with unnecessary excess. I threw myself into the work with energy I'd forgotten I possessed. Each project was a puzzle to solve, a canvas to paint, a story to tell through color and texture and light. My hands remembered skills my mind thought it had lost. The money wasn't significant at first, but it wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I'd abandoned, about remembering I had value beyond being someone's wife. His attempts at contact grew more desperate as reality set in. Messages from new numbers that got blocked immediately. Emails that went to spam. He even tried showing up once, but I'd changed the locks that first week. "I made a mistake," he shouted through the door. "Can we please just talk?" "No," I called back, not even getting up from the couch where I was sketching design ideas. "Go away." "She left me," he said, his voice cracking. The girl. She wanted nothing to do with me once she understood I had no money, no house, nothing to offer. I walked to the door, but didn't open it. "That must be terrible," I said through the wood. Being wanted only for what you can provide, rather than who you are, being discarded when you're no longer useful. Imagine how that feels. Silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hallway. He didn't come back after that. 3 months post-party, I redecorated the entire apartment. New paint, colors warm terracotta in the living room, sage green in the bedroom, soft gray in the kitchen. I bought plants that filled corners with life. I hung artwork that made me smile. I arranged furniture in ways that pleased me, without considering anyone else's preferences. Every change was a reclamation. Every new element was a declaration. This space is mine, shaped by my choices, reflecting my taste, serving my needs. I started hosting AGI and OT formal dinner parties, but casual gatherings with real friends. Laughter filled the rooms. Music played. Conversations flowed freely without me monitoring every word for potential criticism. "This place feels completely different," my sister said during one of these gatherings, glass of wine in hand. "It's like it can finally breathe." "I can finally breathe," I corrected. The divorce proceedings moved forward with expected complications. He fought for more than he deserved, trying to claim that his contributions to the household entitled him to a share of the apartment's value. My lawyer shut that down efficiently. The apartment appreciated significantly during your marriage, his lawyer argued in mediation. Due to market forces, not improvements or contributions from your client, my lawyer countered. He paid no mortgage, there was none. He paid no property taxes, those came from her inheritance account. He has no claim to appreciation on an asset he never owned. We settled, eventually. He got half of our actual marital assets, the savings we'd accumulated together, half the value of furniture we'd purchased jointly, his retirement accounts. It was fair, by the letter of the law, though it felt generous given what he'd tried to do to me. I got my apartment, my freedom, and my self-respect back. The best part? I got my future back. 6 months after the party, I ran into his former secretary at a coffee shop. She looked tired, older somehow despite her youth. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, approaching my table with hesitation. For my part in everything, I didn't understand what I was participating in. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with hard-earned wisdom. "He told you I was awful, didn't he?" I said, cold, distant, no longer interested in him, past my prime. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Here's what I learned," I said, not unkindly. "Men who speak badly about their wives to other women are telling you exactly how they'll speak about you someday. Remember that for next time." She thanked me and left, and I hoped she'd actually remember. I didn't hate her. She'd been a tool in his manipulation, young enough to believe she was special rather than simply convenient. She'd learned her lesson. I hoped it stuck. My life began to take shape around new routines and rediscovered passions. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the park come to life. Afternoons in clients' homes, reimagining their spaces. Evenings with friends or curled up with design books, sketching ideas for my next project. I dated casually, nothing serious, just reminders that I was still desirable, still interesting, still worthy of attention and affection. Some connections fizzled. Others became friendships. None became commitments, and that was perfectly fine. I was learning to be complete on my own before inviting anyone else into my space. The apartment filled with memories that belonged only to me. Dinner parties where I laughed without monitoring my volume. Movie nights where I sprawled across the entire couch. Mornings where I sang off-key in the shower without worry of judgment. Freedom, I discovered, wasn't just the absence of constraint. It was the presence of possibility. Every day, I woke up in my grandmother's apartment, my apartment, and chose how to fill the hours ahead. Some days were hard. Some nights I felt the weight of loneliness. But even on the difficult days, I was lonely in my own space, on my own terms, building a life that belonged completely to me. And that made all the difference. 9 months after the anniversary party that ended my marriage, I sat in my favorite coffee shop with my journal, trying to make sense of the journey from then to now. People ask me all the time, "How did you find the courage to speak up that night?" The truth is, it wasn't courage. It was survival. When you're pushed far enough, when the alternative is complete erasure of self, you find strength you didn't know you possessed. Not because you're brave, but because you're out of options. For years, I'd been slowly disappearing. Every criticism I absorbed, every dismissive comment I swallowed, every time I made myself smaller to accommodate his growing ego, I was erasing myself, piece by piece. By the time he made his announcement that night, there was almost nothing left of the woman I'd once been. Almost Nothing. But not quite. My grandmother's gift, that apartment, that foundation had preserved a piece of me even when I couldn't preserve it myself. Having something that was undeniably, legally, completely mine gave me a foothold when everything else was crumbling. That's why financial independence matters. Not because money is everything, but because having your own resources means having options when love turns toxic. It means you can leave instead of staying because you have nowhere else to go. I learned that self-worth can't come from another person. For 25 years, I measured my value by his approval. When he withheld it, I felt worthless. When he offered crumbs of affection, I felt grateful. I gave him complete control over my sense of self, and he used that power to keep me contained. Reclaiming my worth meant recognizing that I had value regardless of his opinion. My creativity, my kindness, my intelligence, my capacity to love, none of those things disappeared just because he stopped seeing them. They were there all along, waiting for me to remember they existed. I learned that staying in a bad situation doesn't make you weak. Sometimes staying is all you can do while you gather strength for leaving. Sometimes you need to hit bottom before you can push off and swim toward the surface. I don't regret the years I spent trying to save my marriage. They taught me about resilience, about hope, about the lengths people will go to preserve something they've invested everything in. Those weren't wasted years, they were the price of my education. But I also learned that there's a difference between fighting for love and fighting against reality. Love shouldn't require you to shrink. Partnership shouldn't feel like walking on broken glass. Marriage shouldn't cost you your identity. When someone shows you who they are, through actions, not words believe them. I saw the signs for years but explained them away because I was invested in the fantasy version of him rather than the reality. The man I fell in love with and the man I was married to were two completely different people, and it took me far too long to accept that. The affair wasn't the problem. The affair was a symptom. The real problem was the fundamental disrespect, the emotional manipulation, the systematic dismantling of my confidence. He wasn't looking for someone younger, he was looking for someone who hadn't yet learned to see through his performance. I learned that betrayal can be a teacher if you let it. That night at the party, he inadvertently gave me the greatest gift: clarity. His cruelty was so blatant, so public, so undeniable that I couldn't explain it away anymore. He forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding. And the truth, however painful, set me free. I learned that starting over at 53 is terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Every day brings challenges I haven't faced in decades, building a career from scratch, navigating a changed world, figuring out who I am outside the context of marriage. But every day also brings joy I forgot was possible. The simple pleasure of making decisions without permission. The satisfaction of earning my own money. The freedom to fail without someone cataloging my mistakes as proof of inadequacy. I learned that community matters. My sister, my friends, even strangers who heard my story and reached out with encouragement, they held me up what I couldn't stand on my own. We're not meant to survive alone. The people who stayed, who kept calling even when I canceled plans, who saw me even when I was invisible to myself, they saved my life. I learned to forgive myself for staying too long, for accepting too little, for believing lies that were convenient to believe, for all the times I chose peace over honesty, silence over conflict, his comfort over my own well-being. I was doing the best I could with the understanding I had at the time. That's all any of us can do. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late. Not to start over. Not to reclaim yourself. Not to build a life that feels authentic and whole. Age is just a number, it's not a prison sentence or an expiration date. The woman I'm becoming at 53 is stronger, wiser, and more genuinely herself than the woman I was at 28. I've earned every gray hair, every wrinkle, every scar. They're evidence that I survived, that I fought, that I refused to disappear completely. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she left me that apartment. She was giving me more than property. She was giving me the possibility of independence, the option of escape, the foundation for rebuilding. She was telling me, across the years and beyond death, you deserve your own ground to stand on. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. It took me 25 years to fully understand her gift, but I understand it now. A year after that devastating anniversary party, I hosted another gathering in my apartment. This time, it was a celebration of my design firm's official launch. The space was filled with people who loved me, not the performance of me, not the diminished version of me, but the real, whole, imperfect me that was finally allowed to exist. My sister gave a toast. "To the woman who remembered who she was," she said, raising her glass, "and to the life she's building on her own foundation." Everyone drank to that, and I felt my grandmother's presence in the room, proud and strong, the way she'd always been. If you're reading this story, or rather, if you've listened this far and you see yourself in any part of it, please hear me clearly. You are not too old to start over. You are not too invested to walk away from what's destroying you. You are not defined by how long you've endured something that was never meant to be endured. Whether you're 30 or 50 or 70, whether you've been married 5 years or 50, whether you have resources or feel trapped by circumstances, you have more power than you think. It might not feel like it. It might seem impossible. But that's what they want you to believe, the people who benefit from your diminishment. You are not a product with an expiration date. You are not an accessory to be upgraded. You are not past your prime just because someone who stopped seeing you clearly says so. Your worth is not determined by another person's ability to recognize it. If someone makes you feel small, if you're constantly walking on eggshells, if you've lost yourself trying to be what they need, that's not love, that's control. And you deserve better. Financial independence is crucial. If you can, keep something in your own name. Save money they don't know about. Maintain connections with people outside your relationship. Build a life that exists independently of your partnership. Not because you're planning to leave, but because you need to know you could if you had to. The people who truly love you won't be threatened by your independence. They'll celebrate it. And if you're the person who relates to my ex-husband Eve, you've treated someone the way he treated me, it's not too late to change. But change requires acknowledging the harm you've caused, not just when you're caught, but in the quiet moments when no one's watching. It requires understanding that people aren't possessions to be discarded when they no longer serve your ego. My ex-husband lost more than a wife that night. He lost his foundation, his stability, his home base. He lost the woman who'd built him up, who'd believed in him when he was nobody, who'd sacrificed her dreams for his. And for what? For a younger model who left the moment she realized he was just a man, not a meal ticket. For an ego trip that lasted exactly as long as it took reality to set in. I don't hate him anymore. I don't waste energy on bitterness. But I don't miss him either. The space he left in my life has been filled with things that actually matter: purpose, authenticity, joy, peace. This apartment, these walls that have stood strong for 4 decades, they've witnessed my breakdown and my breakthrough. They've held me at my lowest and supported my rise. They're still here, still solid, still mine, just like I am. If this story touched your heart, moved something in you, or made you think differently about your own life, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me, what would you have said in that moment? What's your story of finding your voice? And subscribe, because there are so many more stories to tell, stories of strength, survival, and the incredible resilience of people who refuse to stay broken. Stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles, and it's never too late to reclaim our lives. Remember, you are standing on your own foundation, even if you've forgotten it's there. And some foundations can't be shaken, no matter how hard someone tries. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if you're fighting your own battle right now, keep going. The woman or man you're becoming is worth the fight.